Okay, so talking about the descending tracts, they bring the information from the higher centers of the central nervous system, and then where the descending tracts, these are going to go to the effector organs, right? So before that, it's very important for you to know that you have upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. So upper motor neurons, what's the difference between the two? Upper motor neurons originate in the upper level of central nervous system, and then they come down to modulate the activity of the lower motor neurons. And lower motor neurons, they come out of the central nervous system and they ultimately go to the skeletal muscles, right? Now, here is the perfect written definition in the diagrams for upper motor neurons. Upper motor neuron, they begin in the cerebral cortex and they're going to terminate either in the brainstem or the spinal cord. So this is the upper motor neuron. Begins in the cerebral cortex and it will terminate either in the brainstem or in the spinal cord. So either in the brainstem or the spinal cord, right? So this is its origin and destination. And what about the lower motor neurons? Lower motor neurons, they're going to begin now either in the brainstem or the spinal cord, and then their ultimate destination will be the skeletal muscles. So this is very important. Now this diagram will help you understand this better. So upper motor neuron, they bring the information from the cerebral cortex and they'll terminate either at the level of the brainstem or ultimately at the end of the spinal cord. And from the spinal cord, from the interior gray horn of the spinal cord, your lower motor neuron begins and it will terminate at the skeletal muscle, or it can also begin in the brainstem, depending upon where the upper motor neuron terminated. Now, upper motor neuron, its function is to transmit the signals from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord, and lower motor neuron, its function is to carry that signals from spinal cord to the muscle. So, ultimate destination is the muscle. So, here again, very important, upper motor neuron originates from the brain, cerebral cortex, and it carries the information through the lower motor neurons in the spinal cord or in the brainstem. And lower motor neuron is going to carry that information uh, from either the spinal cord or brainstem to the muscles ultimately. So yes, upper motor neuron is for the voluntary motor commands, and lower motor neuron, it is basically the final common pathway for the muscle activation. It's going to receive the neurons, the impulses from the upper motor neuron. So once again, upper motor neuron can either terminate in the brainstem or it can terminate anywhere in the spinal cord, anywhere at the level of the spinal cord, in the anterior or the ventral gray horn. And from the ventral gray horn itself, or from the brainstem, your lower motor neuron is going to begin and it will ultimately terminate at the skeletal muscle. So this is its final destination. Now, upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. When you talk about the tracts, let's look at the divisions of the tracts. So upper motor neuron can be divided into either of cortical origin or the subcortical origin. So cortical origin, what begins from the cortex, right? So in the cortex, it's going to begin, and now this division is on the basis of where it's going to terminate, either the spinal cord or the nuclei. So cortical origin of upper motor neurons, if they originate, if they will have two divisions. One will be corticospinal tract and corticonuclear fibers. So corticospinal tract, they're also known as pyramidal tract. So these are going to terminate at the level of the spinal cord. Corticonuclear fibers, these are going to terminate in the brainstem. Remember when we said that it begins in cortex, but it is going to terminate either at the brainstem or the spinal cord. So if it terminates at the spinal cord, that is corticospinal tract. And if it terminates at somewhere in the brainstem, so that's corticonuclear. And corticonuclear is further divided in three. So one would be corticomesencephalic because of the midbrain, corticopontine because of the pons, or corticomedullary or corticobulbar because of the medulla oblongata. So here, corticomesencephalic. If you can recall the transverse section of midbrain, we studied that there was central gray matter, then you had cerebral aqueduct, and here you had mesencephalic nuclei of the trigeminal nerve. So exactly, that was midbrain. So corticomesencephalic, corticopontine pons, and then you have corticomedullary medulla oblongata. So this is the also known as corticobulbar. So these all are brainstem. So if it terminates at brainstem, the upper motor neurons, it's going to be corticonuclear fibers. If it terminates at the spinal cord, it will be corticospinal tract. Now, subcortical origin can also be there for upper motor neuron. It could be tectospinal in origin, rubrospinal. So these all are descending tracts. So tectospinal, rubrospinal, reticulospinal, vestibulospinal, and olivospinal. Tectospinal, rubro, reticulo, vestibulo, and olivo. Now let me explain all their functions quickly and then we'll move forward. Corticospinal, this is for voluntary, discrete, skilled movement. So very precise movements of the hand. Voluntary, discrete, skilled movement. Tectospinal. We already did spinotectal in ascending. That was that you felt a prick or you felt maybe the needle, right, on your foot, and then quickly you withdrew your foot from that point of obstacle. So that was because after you felt something, you looked down, right? But here, first of all, you feel or you look at something, sorry, you look at something coming towards you, for example, a ball. So tectum first, because that has superior colliculus that are going to see visual reflex, and then spine, and then you're going to give a reaction to that. So this is basically reflex postural changes to visual stimuli. And then rubrospinal, this begins from the red nucleus, which maintains the muscle tone. So rubrospinal, that's for sitting, right? So flexor muscles, their activity is enhanced and flexor muscles contract, right? And extensor muscles, they're inhibited. The anti-gravity muscles are inhibited, right? And if you talk about reticulospinal, so reticular formation, remember I told you it was an on and off switch for the cerebral cortex. So this can either facilitate or inhibit the voluntary movement. Vestibulospinal, quite the opposite of rubrospinal. This is going to inhibit the activity of flexor, and it's going to stimulate the activity of extensor. So this is going to cause you to rise up, to stand. Remember the VIP slang that your vestibulospinal tract is for, and the pontine, that is to allow you to stand. And olivospinal is for muscular activity. And pontine, I already told you, this is also to help you stand. So corticopontine and um, vestibulospinal, these are for you to stand, right? Now, when you talk about corticospinal, where does it originate? It originates, so now let's discuss all the tracts in depth. Corticospinal, it originates in the cortex, cerebral cortex. Exactly where? These are basically axons of the pyramidal cells of the fifth layer of the cerebral cortex. So your cerebral cortex has a lot of layers, right? So out of the fifth layer, you have pyramidal cells coming out, their axons coming out. So that is the origin of your entire tract. Now, these fibers are going to come off 30% from the primary motor cortex, 30% from the premotor and supplementary cortex, and 40% from the somatosensory cortex. So, a little overview. So, this is your primary motor cortex, then this is premotor and supplementary. So 30% from here, 30% from here collectively, and 40% from the somatosensory. So this all sums up to be 100%. Yes. So these are where the fibers are coming down from. Okay. Now after that, these fibers are going to come down, and also homunculus. What is homunculus? It's basically here you can see this homunculus is going to tell you that this much portion of the brain is concerned with the activity of this part. For example, the lower part of the brain, it's concerned with the activity of the face, and the upper part, that's concerned with the activity of the limbs. uh, so basically they're saying that the region controlling the face is situated inferiorly, and the region controlling the lower limb is situated superiorly and on the medial surface of the hemisphere. The corticospinal fibers. Also, one thing about the homunculus is that it's a distorted picture of the body with various parts having a size proportional to the area of the cerebral cortex. Various parts having the size which is proportional to the area of the cerebral cortex that is devoted to their control. Now, when you talk about corticospinal tracts, the very interesting thing about them is that their fibers are unmyelinated, therefore, they will be very slow conducting, right? So they'll be very slow conducting, and there'll be also small fibers. So there'll be slow conducting small fibers. These are corticospinal tracts for you guys. Now, what happens that these descending fibers, they converge in the corona radiata, and then they pass through the posterior limb of the internal capsule. And here the fibers are organized so that the closest to the genu are concerned with the cervical portions of the body, while those which are situated most posteriorly are concerned with the lower extremity. The tract then continues through the middle three-fifths of the bases of pedunculi of the midbrain. Here the fibers concerned, okay, on entering the pons, the tract is broken into bundles. So corona radiata, posterior limb of the internal capsule, and then on entering the so midbrain it enters normally, but on entering the pons it is broken down into bundles, right? Uh, by what? By the transverse pontine pontocerebellar fibers. So these are the transverse pontocerebellar fibers that are going to break down this tract into bundles. And on entering, okay, once in the medulla oblongata, the bundles become grouped again together at the level of the pyramid. So once it comes in the medulla oblongata, again it comes bundled together in the pyramids. That's the reason this is called pyramidal tract. At the junction of the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord, so this is the junction of the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord, a very important thing happens, which is decussation. So most of the fibers are going to cross the midline, and they'll form decussation of the pyramids, and they'll enter the lateral white column. So they'll enter the lateral white column. Here I've made the mistake, lateral white column here. Most of the fibers are going to decussate and they'll enter the lateral white column. After entering the lateral white column, uh, okay, so these ones are known as lateral corticospinal tracts. Also, there's some that do not decussate, and they will just come down anteriorly to the anterior white column, and then they'll decussate at this level, right in the gray matter, right? And uh, after entering the anterior white column of the spinal cord, as the anterior spinal corticospinal tract, these fibers eventually cross the midline and terminate at the interior gray column. So first of all, they enter the interior white column, and then they'll cross over and go to the interior gray column. So their decussation of the interior fibers, it happens here. And these decussate here and then lateral spinothalamic, and they enter the lateral white column and then the lateral anterior gray column or anterior gray horn. So again, the lateral corticospinal tracts descend the entire length of the spinal cord. Their fibers terminate at the anterior gray column of the spinal cord, anterior gray column. So the eventual final point is the interior gray column for both of them, interior gray column, right? Now, after coming in the interior gray column, these are going to synapse with the internuntial, which in turn, internuntial neurons, which in turn synapse with an alpha motor neuron and some with a gamma motor neuron, and then, yes, with the muscle. Motor neurons are directly in contact with the muscles. So these are concerned with your voluntary movement, rapid skill movement, right? Yes. Now moving on. Lateral, and so you had like a lateral spinocortical tract and an interior corticospinal tract, lateral corticospinal tract and an interior corticospinal tract. So lateral corticospinal tract, that's an advanced system, intricate hand movement, and interior um, is for the primitive system. So that's for the axial musculature movement, because axial musculature was there in the olden days as well. Okay, so again, lateral and ventral. Ventral is for the